And good afternoon to you all from our nation's capital and from my home studio. This is your host, Arash. I'm happy to be with you once again after my not so very long trip to California. And man, oh man, when you get to California, the weather is addictive. It's beautiful, it's laid back, people are very nice, they don't wear that much, they share a lot of skin for sure. And the weather was gorgeous. We went to cover an event that was held by the Nixon Foundation in Orange County, California, a couple of days ago. The Nixon Foundation has an annual event to celebrate the friendship between the former Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, and President Nixon and his family. And the two families send their envoys there. Of course, Princess Noor Pahlavi from the Pahlavi family and Christian Nixon, grandson of President Nixon. They were there. They had a very cordial panel, talked about the family history and a bunch of facts and anecdotes about the golden days of the relationship between the United States of America and the Imperial of Iran. And it was a good a breeze of hope, I would call it, a breeze of hope. It was a good experience because for those of us who've been born during or right before the Islamic Revolution, we never lived to experience, we never lived long enough to experience the Pahlavi dynasty and the rule before the Islamic Revolution in Iran. So I call it a successful experience. And um, coming back from California, you come to DC, it's humid, it's hotter, people are frowning, they're not as healthy looking or as happy looking as people in California. And the jet lag, 3 hour difference back to back. Well, we're here in DC again. And today I'm going to talk about the latest developments regarding the blockade of Iranians in the Strait of Hormuz and the signal that the Trump administration is sending out there to everyone that this blockade is going to take some time. And next step for the Trump administration, what is that going to be? We're going to look into that. So without further ado, let's hop in to the train of the blockade. So yesterday, former defense, now War Secretary Pete Hegseth, he had a joint conference with General Dan Kane, the Joint Chief of Staff, the head of the Joint Chief of Staff, U.S. Army, and they talked at length about what is going to be next for as far as the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, how many American ships, how many aircraft carriers, how many frigates, what assets the US is going to use in order to extend that blockade. And one thing that Pete Hegseth said during his press conference that really caught me by surprise was that he said the next phase of the blockade for the Iranians would be a global blockade. So the US Army would expand its operation across the globe in order to blockade the Iranian shipping. What does that mean, really? And why would the US need to move to the global phase of blockade? If they really want to stop Iran from trade, the Strait of Hormuz is the length of what the Iranian shippings can get as far as past the shallow waters, getting into deep waters. So most of the trade, as you can see, most of the trade, but not all of the trade, goes through the Strait of Hormuz, even for Iranians. And most of the trade on the western side of the Strait of Hormuz, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, to some extent, Bahrain, they all have to go through pretty much through the Strait of Hormuz. For Iran, the oil is on the western side, Khark Island, and then that large island on top, that's Qeshm Island. Qeshm is really underutilized by Iran mostly. A few other tiny islands there that the Iranians control. Not much trade going on from those islands to the outside world. And to the far east sits Bandar Lenge, Bandar Chabahar, um, and then Asaluye, which Iranians export some of their products, petrochemical mostly goes through Asaluye. Also, there are some oil projects there developed mostly by Indians, but they're left half undone due to the US sanctions mostly. So, as you can see, much of the trade, this is a much better map in terms of shallow waters and deep waters. So, to the west, you see mostly the shallow waters. Those are waters that even tiny ships, tiny boats can take in order to, transit goods, transits different types of commodities between Iran and United Arab Emirates. It mostly goes through Sharjah, Al Fujairah, and then from Dubai all the way to Iran and back. On the right side, on the eastern side, you see the deep waters. Those are waters that cannot easily be navigated. You need a stronger boat in order to be able to navigate those waters. So most of the traffic awaits the western side, sticks to eastern side. So if the US wants to blockade the Iranian activities as far as shipping and transit of commodities, well, they can just stick to the Strait of Hormuz or expand to the eastern side of the Persian Gulf all the way to the Arabian Sea or Sea of Oman. And that's pretty much 100% of Iranian shipping goes through that. Why would they have to go through and develop? Why would they have to go through this plan of developing the blockade and going well beyond the Strait of Hormuz? And that's where we get to the Strait of Malacca. Now, Strait of Malacca is this tiny little strait, as you can see. If you can expand, if Armanjan can expand the map. So if you have any kind of shipping going through the Strait of Hormuz, and then you want to export your goods to China or coming from China or Japan or South Korea, you have to go through the Strait of Malacca, which is a tiny strait. It's even narrower than the Strait of Hormuz. It's one of the most visible waterways in the world. It's the most visible and most surveillable waterways in the world. Makes it much easier for Americans to choke that route. 80% of China's export and imports goes through Strait of Malacca. So 80% of Chinese goods are going to Strait of Malacca. Nearly 85% of the Japanese goods. Pretty much the same amount for South Koreans. Everything that's going to Europe or from Europe to Southeast Asia, from India to Southeast Asia, from the Middle East or Africa to Southeast Asia has to go through the Strait of Hormuz, or the secondary route would be for the shipping to go. And if they want to circumvent the Strait of Malacca, they have to go and pass Australia and New Zealand all the way going to the Pacific Ocean and then go to Japan or China. That would add another 3 to 4 weeks of navigation time. From 3 to 4 weeks navigation time plus insurance, plus gas, plus all the manpower that they need to hire to be able to do that. So that would significantly increase the ratings. In case the United States decides to choke the Strait of Malacca. And why would they do that? They don't really necessarily have to choke the Strait of Malacca. What they can do is that they can start boarding shipping in Strait of Malacca to see which of these boats, which of these tankers are going to Iran, which are not, which one of them are coming from China, which one of them are bringing weaponry to Iran from China. They can board these shippings and add a significant amount of time because all these ships, then they have to be checked, then there will be delays. Even without getting into Strait of Malacca, the war between the United States and Iran has completely shattered the traditional supply chain. The supply chain for nearly everything has been disrupted. Even if the war stops tomorrow, even if the Iranians and Americans step back and allow the shipping from the Strait of Hormuz to go back to normal, it would take months before everything goes back to normal, before the amount of shipping goes back to scheduling, from the scheduling to insurance. Some of these companies have already rerouted their shipping lanes. Customers are choosing different sellers. The market is deciding. And the next step for the United States would be use this as an excuse, use this war with Iran and the blockade of Strait of Hormuz as an excuse to go into the Strait of Malacca. Now, I was putting together some data about what's happening as far as the US military might in the region. And I reported on my other social media about the United States sending USS George Bush and its carrier group to the region almost 70, 80 days ago. USS George Bush was in Norfolk, Virginia when Donald Trump, US president, decided to send Abraham Lincoln carrier group to the region. So USS George Bush was in Norfolk, Virginia at the time, was participating in a naval drill and then came back for maintenance to Norfolk, Virginia. So during the Operation Epic Fury, it stayed home. But after that, it was dispatched from Norfolk, Virginia, was spotted in the Atlantic, and now it is on its way to join Abraham Lincoln Carrier Group. It's somewhere near the Persian Gulf right now. It would take another day or two for USS George Bush to reach to where the United States can utilize it. And when you take that into account, all of the confusion about the negotiations, so-called negotiations between Iran, the Islamic Republic, and the United States. And why everyone is asking, why is President Donald Trump just delaying these talks? Just why is he delaying the ceasefire? Well, now we know that he's delaying the ceasefire because he needs to bring in more firepower. So USS George Bush brings a lot of firepower to the region. The claim that Pete Hegseth made about the United States extending the Iranian blockade globally while bringing in USS George Bush carrier group gives the United States the means to extend this operation probably all the way to the Indian Ocean and Strait of Malacca. So what does USS George Bush bring to the table? Well, if we go back to some of the videos, if Arman John puts up USS George Bush and their carrier group. So they bring persistent ISR surveillance. They bring FA-18 Strike Umbrella, FA-18 Super Hornet, which allows the carrier group to continue bombing bunkers so they can carry huge loads of bunker buster bombs. F-18 Hornets And then they also bring E2 Hawkeye radar controls. E2 Hawkeye is one of the um, crown jewels of US surveillance and radar technology, electronic warfare suppression, anti submarine envelope, maritime interdiction support, helicopter boarding teams, destroyer missile shields. So, anywhere these groups park, the US Navy can enforce rules. Wherever they park, the US Navy can enforce rules. And as you can see, the kind of power that they're bringing into the region is not just for show. This is for enforcing rules. These frigates, these aircraft carriers have the capability to reach out to multiple parts of the ocean very quickly. They're very agile, they're very nimble, also carrying F-35Cs. F-35Cs designed for naval operations, and naval operations within the reach of USS George Bush means they can expand their operation into the Indian Ocean. So where can they operate? Well, Strait of Hormuz is one of their destinations. Arabian Sea, Gulf of Oman, Northern Indian Ocean, sea lanes towards Singapore. And that's the key because seaways towards Singapore is where mostly satellites find the Iranian shadow fleet of tankers. So if the Iranian shipping is trying to transfer some of their oil from tanker to tanker, usually they get close to Singapore. And that's very important for the US to be able to control that. So, blockade enforcement is becoming global. Bear in mind that President Trump is about to meet Xi Jinping soon in Beijing, in Peking or Beijing, whatever you call it. In Farsi, it's Peking, in English, Beijing. So having this tool in its toolbox and using it right now in order to enforce the Iranian blockade and President Trump traveling to China, that sends a very clear message to the Chinese that their trade, their economy is at stake. Right now, it's on the line, actually. If the Chinese continue helping the regime in Iran, buying their oils, buying their LNG, selling them weaponry, giving them satellite information, President Trump can easily choke their economy in the Strait of Malacca. And I think they gave a very clear signal about what the next step for the US government is going to be as far as pressuring China. Iran is an excuse. Iran is an excuse. The Strait of Malacca can be in play. And once the Strait of Malacca is in play, then global trade is in play. It's not only the Chinese shipping that is going through the Strait of Malacca. Japanese, South Korean, European, a lot of EU's trade goes through the Strait of Malacca. US's trade, some of the US's trade goes to Strait of Malacca, but it's not that much. US trade goes to the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. They usually don't pass the Strait of Malacca. They don't pass the Strait of Hormuz either. American shipping rarely pass through the Suez Canal, rarely pass through the Strait of Hormuz, rarely pass through the Strait of Malacca. It's mostly dominated by Chinese trade. It's mostly dominated by Southeast Asian trade or European trade. And these are the countries who should be worried about what's going to happen next. Now, if you haven't buried your head into the sand, you would know that Europeans are dead afraid of President Trump's next move. They've been attacking the United States rhetorically. They've been attacking his policies. If you listen to mainstream media and legacy media in Europe, there's not a single day that goes by that they don't blame the Trump administration because they're very afraid of what's going to happen next for Europe. Europeans are unprepared. They don't have enough military might. They can't project power anywhere in the world. They're unable to project power in the sea. They're unable to project power in the air. They're unable to project power on land. And that makes them a second ranking power. They're not even a superpower anymore, the European, even as a whole. France, Germany, Britain, basically what's going to happen next for these countries, what's in the bag for these countries, they don't have any control over it. So now the control is in Washington or in Moscow or in Beijing or even in Tehran for that matter. And there's not much European can do. Even if the United States pulls back from the Strait of Hormuz and the regime in Iran decides that it's not going to allow shipping from the Strait of Hormuz to pass, there's not much the Europeans can do militarily in order to be able to open it. There's not much they can do. And that is terrifying them right now. If you're following news from Europe, they're already talking about rationing, higher taxes, unemployment, recession. The news is all bad for Europe right now, and they have a very tiny window to make a decision. Either throw their whatever they have of might, economic might, power, whatever they have militarily, economically, throw it behind the United States and pretty much appease Donald Trump. If they don't, then they have to think about where they're going to have to buy their oil from, which is mostly going to be from Canada and United States. There's not many other options for Europeans at this point. They have sanctions themselves out of Russian oil too. So that will be a huge problem. The rest of the assets that the United States is carrying around Iran, parked around Iran, is USS Gerald Ford Carrier Group. The USS Gerald Ford Carrier Group is USS Gerald Ford is the newest U.S. aircraft carrier. It's the new Ford class group carrier, the first aircraft carrier from the Ford class group. All other 10 aircraft carriers that the United States possesses at this point are Nimitz class carriers. Nimitz class carriers were designed pretty much in the 60s and 70s, and they were built mostly in the 80s and 90s. So they're very old. Most of them are very old. They've been renovated many times. And then at some point, the US Congress decided that they need to include a bunch of other new technologies, and these new technologies cannot be fitted into the old Nimitz class. So they had to redesign the whole aircraft carrier system. The Ford class carrier, USS Gerald Ford, is the first on the line. It has been operational for a few years now. The United States has been using it for quite some times in Latin America. USS Gerald Ford was parked right outside of Venezuela for a long time, and then it was sent to help the US Navy and US Air Force to extract Nicolas Maduro. Allegedly, Nicolas Maduro, when he was arrested by American forces, then he was sent on one of the frigates, and from that frigate was sent to USS Gerald Ford, allegedly. But then after that operation, President Trump sent USS Gerald Ford to the Middle East. And it took 3 or 4 weeks for Gerald Ford to get into the Middle East. Then the Operation Epic Fury started. Operation Epic Fury took nearly 40 days. And within that 40 days, Gerald Ford was a pillar of the operational success of the United States in terms of surveillance, in terms of logistics, also in terms of bombing key facilities, nuclear facilities, also ballistic missile capabilities, missile launchers in Iran. So USS Gerald Ford has had a very long and tiring trip. In my humble opinion, the reason that President Trump announced a ceasefire was mostly because he's a good manager and he knows that the crew was getting tired. The crew was doing an outstanding job. The USS Gerald Ford crew did an outstanding job. They needed to cool down a little bit. They needed to rest a little bit. President Trump he's been a manager for quite some time. He's run a bunch of businesses, and especially in um, show business, he knows very well that you won't be able to get much of the crew if they're tired. So he announced a ceasefire not because he wanted to make a deal with the regime in Iran. As we can obviously see, and as the news is developing, obviously the Iranian foreign minister left Islamabad a couple of hours ago before even meeting Americans. So that was very obvious. President Trump also said he hasn't sent Kushner. Kushner and Witkoff were not dispatched to Islamabad. That was obvious. So there's no deals to be had. At this point, Iranians feel that they are controlling the Strait of Hormuz. They have a domestic audience. They're using basically these tactics of piracy in order to extort the um, Gulf countries, the Persian Gulf countries, such as United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain. The regime in Iran is extorting these Persian Gulf monarchies into submission. That's their plan. And the United States government also is kicking the can down the road because they want this blockade to continue. They want the oil disruption to continue. The Trump administration want this to continue because this is not about oil, this is not about Iran, this is about control. Who is going to control the choke points of international and global trade in the world? And the answer is the only country in the world which has the capacity to do that. United States of America's Navy, USS George Bush, USS Gerald Ford. There are rumors that USS Theodore Roosevelt is being maintained. It's going under a bunch of maintenance. Might replace USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Group. Theodore Roosevelt is also one of the lately modernized Nimitz class carrier groups. If the president of United States adds that carrier group to this bunch, it will be the fourth carrier group in the region. It would be very unusual. Even having three aircraft carriers in the region is not that normal. It's been a while since the United States has dispatched three aircraft carrier groups into the Persian Gulf in the Middle East. And the fourth one, if they decide to send the fourth carrier group, that would be an anomaly. That would be an aberration. That would be something the United States has never done, would signal a significant escalation in this war. It seems like the blockade is going to continue. Anyone who's telling you otherwise is mistaken. This President Trump is in it to win it. He's not going to back out from this. He doesn't worry about the he doesn't have to worry about his next term. There's no next terms to be had. He's made these deals not with the Republican Party, but with people like Larry Fink of BlackRock, people like Jensen Huang on NVIDIA, people like Jamie Dimon, people in Wall Street. And him and his family is definitely going to benefit from this new world order a lot. They don't care about the midterm election. They don't care about the party affiliation. The Trump administration is in it to win it. And I think that would bring us to the close. Thank you so much again for joining me in just another live hit on Arash Unfiltered. I have to thank you, thank the whole team and the crew who's been helping, especially Armand John in London. I thank my fans and people who are commenting here. I can't read your names on this software right now, but I love you so much. If it wasn't for your support, we wouldn't dare to even start a new channel in English. So I thank you very much. And we'll be coming back tomorrow with the second part of what's going to happen as far as the blockade, what is going to be the implications of this blockade for the international shipping, for the supply chain, for companies like NVIDIA, for companies like BlackRock. We will explain this more in my next live. So come back here tomorrow and join us in yet another live. Until then, thank you so much, Javicha, and goodbye.